In the summer of the year 678, an Arab fleet lay off the walls of Constantinople, and its admirals believed the greatest city in the world was about to fall. They had the largest navy on earth. They had already broken every enemy the Prophet's armies had faced, from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Persia to the coast of North Africa. For years, their ships had blockaded the Byzantine capital, tightening the noose, cutting the sea lanes, waiting for hunger to finish what the sword had started. And then the Roman galleys came out of the harbor to meet them, low and fast, with strange bronze tubes mounted on their bows. What happened next should have been impossible. The sea caught fire. A jet of liquid flame leapt from the Roman ships and fell across the water, and the water did not put it out. It spread. It ran between the hulls in burning sheets. It clung to timber and rope and sail. It climbed the sides of the Arab ships and would not be beaten out. Men who leapt into the sea to escape the flames found the sea itself alight around them. In a matter of hours, the fleet that had come to end an empire was a field of burning wrecks, and the survivors fled south with a story no one wanted to believe. The city was saved, and it was not saved by its walls or its emperor or its god. It was saved by a liquid in a bronze tube, a weapon so secret that its name has come down to us, but its formula never has. We call it Greek fire. And this is the story of how a refugee's invention broke two invasions, changed the shape of the medieval world, and then vanished so completely that to this day, no one on earth can make it. Start with the thing everyone gets wrong. The power of Greek fire was not the fire. Fire was old. Armies had been burning each other for as long as there had been armies. The ancient world knew pitch and naphtha and burning oil and flaming arrows. Sailors had thrown pots of blazing tar at enemy ships for centuries. Incendiaries were not new, and they were not secret, and they did not win wars. A flaming arrow is a nuisance. A pot of burning pitch is a gamble that breaks on the deck or misses in the wind. None of it could decide a battle, because none of it could be aimed, sustained, and delivered in a controlled stream against a moving target on the open sea. That is what Byzantium built. Not a new kind of fire, a new kind of machine to deliver it. The genius of Greek fire was never the chemistry alone. It was a system, a pump to pressurize the liquid, a furnace to heat it, a nozzle to aim it, and a crew trained to work all three at once on the pitching deck of a warship in the middle of a battle. And around that machine, wrapped around it like armor, a second weapon that mattered as much as the first. A secret. A silence so total, so ruthlessly enforced, that the empire kept the recipe for 400 years and then carried it into the grave. The obvious weapon was the flame. The hidden weapon was the delivery, and the secret that no enemy could ever steal. That is what this story is really about. Not fire, the machine, and the silence. To understand where it came from, you have to understand how close the empire was to death. By the middle of the 7th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Greek-speaking Christian state we now call Byzantium, was fighting for its life. In the space of a single generation, a new power had erupted out of Arabia. The armies of Islam, unified and driven by faith, had torn through the exhausted empires of the Old World with a speed that stunned everyone who watched it. They took Syria, they took Egypt, the richest province and the empire's breadbasket. They took Palestine and Jerusalem itself. Byzantium lost more than half its territory in less than 20 years, and the losses did not stop. The armies of the Caliphate pushed north and west, and everyone could see where they were going. They were going for the capital. They were going for Constantinople. And Constantinople was the prize that would end the war. It was the largest, richest, most heavily fortified city in the Christian world. It sat on a triangle of land, where Europe meets Asia, guarding the strait between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, ringed by the greatest walls ever built. Whoever held it held the door between two continents. If it fell, there was nothing behind it. The empire would be finished, and Islam would have an open road into Eastern Europe. The whole future of the medieval world was going to be decided at those walls. The walls could stop an army. That was the problem the Arabs had already solved. They would not come only by land. They would come by sea, with the largest fleet ever assembled, and they would strangle the city from the water. And against a fleet, the great land walls of Constantinople were just stone facing an empty horizon. The empire needed something new. It needed a weapon that could kill ships. And into that desperate moment walked a refugee with a secret. His name, as the chronicles remember it, was Callinicos. He came from Heliopolis, a city in Syria, one of the provinces the empire had just lost to the Arab conquest. He was an architect or a craftsman or an engineer. The sources are not sure, and they are not even sure of his faith, calling him variously a Christian, a Jew, a Syrian Greek. What they agree on is the shape of the story. He was a man from a conquered land who fled to Constantinople, carrying with him the knowledge of a weapon, and he offered that weapon to the emperor. The main source, the chronicler Theophanes the Confessor, writing more than a century later, gives him the credit by name. Callinicos, he says, brought the empire its fire. The truth is probably a little more tangled, and it is worth being honest about it. Theophanes' own account hints that Byzantine ships were already carrying flame-throwing siphons before Callinicos arrived, so he may not have invented the fire from nothing. He may have perfected it, brought the missing piece, the right recipe, or the right apparatus. That turned a promising idea into a war-winning weapon. History does that more often than we admit. The breakthrough is rarely one man in one moment. It is the last piece, clicking into a puzzle other people had already half-built. But whether he invented it or completed it, the result was the same. Around the year 672, the Eastern Roman Empire had a weapon no one else in the world possessed. Now look at the machine itself, because the machine is the miracle. At the heart of it was the liquid. We do not know exactly what it was, though that is the whole point, and we will come back to it. But modern scholars are fairly confident about the base. It was petroleum. Light, crude oil, the kind that seeps naturally from the ground around the Black Sea and the Caspian, thin and low in viscosity and terrifyingly easy to burn. To that base, the Byzantines almost certainly added other things. Pine resin to thicken it and make it cling, sulfur to help it catch and to foul the air with choking fumes, perhaps quicklime, perhaps pitch. The exact blend was the secret. But the base was oil, and oil is why it did the one thing that broke every mind that saw it. It floated, and floating, it burned. That is the property that changed naval warfare. Every sailor in the ancient world knew that the answer to fire was water. Fire on your deck, you throw water on it, the fire dies. It was the oldest reflex at sea. Greek fire turned that reflex into a death sentence. Throw water on it, and the burning oil floated on top of the water and kept burning. And now you had spread it. It could not be doused. According to the accounts that survive, the only things that could smother it were sand, which cut off the air, or strong vinegar, or urine. And in the chaos of a burning ship, a man reaching for sand while the flames climbed the rigging was a man already losing. On the open sea, there was no sand. There was only the water that made it worse. But the liquid alone was still just a liquid. The weapon was how they threw it. The delivery system was a device the Byzantines called a siphon, a tube of bronze mounted on the bow of a warship. Behind it, below the deck, was the mechanism that scholars have spent a century trying to reconstruct. The best reconstruction, worked out by the historians John Haldon and Maurice Byrne, and later built at full scale, has three parts working together. A pump, probably a force pump of a type the Romans had known for centuries, to put the liquid under pressure. A brazier or furnace to heat it, because heated oil flows and atomizes and catches far more violently than cold. And at the mouth of the tube, a flame, so that the pressurized, heated liquid, forced out through the nozzle, ignited as it left and became a jet of fire. When Halden's team built it and fired it, the machine threw flame 10 to 15 meters. 15 meters of burning liquid, aimed, sustained, and pouring out under pressure onto whatever the crew pointed it at. Stop and picture what that meant in a sea battle of the 7th century. Ships fought close, oar to oar, so men could board and fight hand to hand. Two fleets came together in a churning mass of hulls, and into that mass the Byzantine ships poured fire. Not one flaming arrow, not one thrown pot, a continuous, roaring stream of it, playing across the enemy decks like water from a hose, setting the sea itself alight between the ships. There was no defense. You could not put it out. You could not sail through it. You could not throw it back. You could only burn or leap into a sea that was also burning. It was, for its time, as close to a weapon of mass destruction as the world had ever seen. And only one empire on Earth could make it. And terror was part of the design. A weapon that kills is one thing. A weapon that turns the sea into fire, that cannot be quenched, that seems to defy the natural order of the world, that breaks men before it touches them. Sailors who had heard the stories would have felt the courage drain out of them the moment they saw those bronze tubes swing toward their ships. Byzantium did not just have a weapon that killed fleets. It had a weapon that made whole navies afraid to come. In the year 674, it got its first great test. The Caliphate had come for the city at last. An enormous Arab fleet moved into the Sea of Marmara, seized a peninsula just outside Constantinople as a base, and settled in for a blockade that would last, on and off, for years. Their plan was patient and sound. Control the water, cut the city off, starve it, and wait. Every spring, the fleet would press the attack. Every winter it would pull back to base and refit. Time was on their side. Constantinople could not be resupplied if the sea belonged to the enemy, and the sea for now belonged to the enemy. Then the emperor, Constantine IV, sent out his ships with the new weapon on their bows. What followed was not a battle so much as a burning. The Byzantine galleys, fast and low, closed on the Arab fleet and opened their siphons, and the sea filled with fire. Theophanes, our chronicler, records the result in a single flat and terrible line. The whole crews of the burning ships perished. The Arab fleet, the instrument of the whole strategy, was shattered on the water, and the survivors' luck ran out on the way home. A storm caught the retreating remnant and finished what the fire had begun. The first great Arab bid to take Constantinople had failed, and it had failed at sea, to a weapon its admirals could not answer and could not understand. The blockade was broken, the city held. And a new fact settled over the eastern Mediterranean, a fact that would shape the next 2 centuries. The Romans had fire that burned on water, and no one else did. But the Caliphate did not give up on the great prize. It only waited and gathered its strength, and 40 years later, it came back for the largest and most dangerous attempt of all. In the year 717, the armies and fleets of the Caliphate moved on Constantinople again, and this time the scale was crushing. A vast army marched up through Asia Minor to invest the land walls. An immense fleet. The sources give numbers in the many hundreds of ships, so many that contemporaries struggled to count them, came to close the sea and complete the ring. It was, by any measure, an existential moment. If Constantinople fell in 718, there was very little standing between the armies of Islam and the heart of Europe. Historians have argued ever since that this siege, more than almost any other single event, decided whether the medieval Mediterranean world would be Christian or Muslim. Everything was on the walls and on the water. On the throne was a new emperor, a hard and capable soldier named Leo III. And Leo had 2 things his enemies had not counted on. He had the walls, still unbroken after 3 centuries, and he had the fire. As the Arab fleet moved to seal the strait, the Byzantine navy struck. Once again the siphons opened, and once again the fire fell across the water, and Arab ships burned in the current where the Bosporus meets the sea. The Byzantines could not destroy the whole enormous fleet at a stroke. It was too large. But they did something just as decisive. They kept the sea contested. They made it deadly for the Arab ships to close the ring completely, and so they kept a lifeline open. Constantinople could still be supplied by sea. And that meant the siege became a test of endurance, and endurance was where the great expedition came apart. The winter of 717 into 718 was savage, one of the hardest anyone could remember. The Arab army, camped in the open on hostile ground, far from home, froze and starved. Disease swept the camps. The animals died, and then the men. And in the spring, when two great fleets were sent from Egypt and North Africa to reinforce and resupply the siege, disaster compounded disaster. The crews of those fleets, many of them Christian conscripts from the conquered provinces, deserted in large numbers, rowing across to the Byzantines. And the ships that remained were hunted down and burned by the Roman navy with the fire. The reinforcements that were supposed to save the siege were destroyed before they could reach it. By the summer, the greatest army the Caliphate had ever sent against Constantinople was a wreck of cold, hunger, disease, and fire. On the 15th of August, 718, the siege was lifted, and the survivors began the long, deadly retreat home. Storms and more fire pursued them. Of the vast host that had set out to take the city, only a fraction ever saw home again. Constantinople had held. Europe's eastern door had stayed shut, and once again, at the center of the story, was the fire that burned on water. Two invasions 40 years apart, each one aimed at ending the empire and each one capable of doing it. Both broken, and in both, the decisive edge was the same weapon. Not because it killed the most men, but because it did the one thing that mattered. It denied the enemy, the sea. It made the water, which should have been the empire's greatest weakness, into a wall of fire the Caliphate could not cross. Which brings us to the second weapon, the one wrapped around the first, the secret. Byzantium understood exactly what it had, and it understood that a weapon like this was only as powerful as it was rare. The moment an enemy could make Greek fire, its magic was gone. So the empire guarded the recipe with a discipline that has almost no equal in the history of technology. The formula was a state secret of the highest order, held by the emperor and a tiny circle around him, and the making of it was deliberately split apart, so that no single workshop, no single artisan held the whole of the knowledge. We know just how seriously they took it, because one emperor wrote it down. In the 10th century, Constantine VII, called Porphyrogenitos, composed a private handbook of statecraft for his son and heir. And in it, he warns the boy, in the gravest possible terms, never to give the secret of the fire to anyone. He dresses the warning in a holy legend. The fire, he tells his son, was revealed by an angel to the first Christian emperor, Constantine the Great, and the angel laid a curse on any ruler who would share it with a foreign people. Prepare it, he says, only in the imperial city, and give it to no one else, ever. Strip away the angel and the curse, and what you are reading is a state security protocol, passed from father to son. This is the thing that keeps us alive, and if you lose the secret, you lose everything. And the secret held. That is the astonishing part. Over the centuries, enemies captured Byzantine ships with the siphons still mounted on their bows. Spies and officials were bribed. Pieces of the weapon fell into hostile hands more than once. And still, no one could reproduce it, because the weapon was never just the recipe. It was the recipe and the apparatus and the pressurized, heated, dangerous craft of operating it without burning your own ship to the waterline. All of it together, held only inside one empire. You could steal a siphon. You could not steal the knowledge of how to make the fire that fed it, or the skill to fire it and live. The secret was not a piece of paper. It was a whole system, and the system could not be carried off in a captured hold. So Byzantium held its monopoly on the ultimate weapon for 400 years. And then the very perfection of the secret became its doom. Because a secret kept that well can be lost, and this one was. We still do not know the formula of Greek fire. Not really. We have the fragments, the descriptions in the chronicles, the reconstructions of the apparatus, the near certainty that the base was light petroleum with resin and sulfur worked into it. But we do not have the recipe, because the recipe was never fully written down where it could survive. Even the accounts that seem to describe it describe only pieces. Centuries after the sieges, a Byzantine princess, named Anna Komnene, one of the finest historians of the age, set down a description of the fire in her great history of her father's reign. Resin from pine and evergreen, she wrote, rubbed with sulfur and forced through tubes, catching light and falling on the enemy like a fiery whirlwind. It is vivid, it is real, and it is incomplete. A glimpse of one part of the weapon, written by someone who was not trusted with the whole. That was the trap the empire had built for itself. By splitting the knowledge, by trusting it to almost no one, by burying it under oaths and curses and silence, Byzantium made the secret unstealable. It also made it unrecoverable. As the empire shrank over the centuries, as it lost the territories where the raw oil was gathered, as the wars ground on, and the workshops closed, and the men who knew the craft died without passing all of it on, the knowledge frayed. Piece by piece, the system came apart. And when Constantinople finally fell for the last time, in 1453, to an army with cannon and gunpowder, the weapon that had saved it 800 years before was already a memory. The perfect secret had done exactly what it was built to do. It had kept the fire out of every enemy's hands, including in the end our own. Think about what that means. There is no other weapon quite like it. We know the recipe for gunpowder. We can build a trebuchet, a crossbow, a Roman siege engine, a medieval sword, from the sources and the surviving examples. But Greek fire, the weapon that twice saved the greatest city in the Christian world and helped decide the religious map of a continent, is genuinely lost. Modern scientists can get close. They can mix petroleum and resin and make something that burns on water. But no one can say with confidence, this is it. This is what came out of those bronze tubes off the walls of Constantinople. The Byzantines guarded it so well that they took it with them. Go back at the end to that summer day in 678 and to the Arab admiral watching the sea burn. He had the larger fleet. He had the momentum of 100 years of conquest. He had every reason to believe the city was his. And he lost to a thing he could not see and could not understand. A liquid in a bronze tube, mixed in a workshop he would never find, from a recipe guarded by an oath and a curse. He did not lose to a better navy. He lost to a secret. That is the pattern this whole channel keeps finding, and Greek fire is its purest example. The thing that decides the war is almost never the thing on the surface. It was not the walls, though the walls were the greatest in the world. It was not the emperor, though Constantine and Leo were hard and capable men. It was not even the fire itself, because fire was old. It was the machine that delivered the fire and the silence that surrounded it, the two invisible weapons working together that a refugee carried into a doomed city, and that a dying empire finally took to its grave. The next time you read that Constantinople held against the armies of the Caliphate, that the eastern door of Europe stayed shut when it might have been broken open, remember what really held it. Not the stone, not the crown. A liquid that burned on water, and a secret so well kept that we are still trying, 13 centuries later, to figure out what it was. They called it Greek fire, And it is the only superweapon in history that won its war, saved its empire, and then disappeared so completely that no one who came after could ever build it again.